My son told me to be ready at 4 p.m. for a special Mother's Day surprise. I spent hours curling my hair and ironing my best silk dress, thinking he finally wanted to spoil me. But when he pulled into the driveway, he wasn't alone. His mother-in-law stepped out of the back seat, waving a diamond bracelet in my face. My son looked at me, blocking the car door, so I couldn't get in, and laughed. "Mom, snap a photo of us? Did you really think this fancy dinner was for you?" I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I just watched them drive away. But at 8:15 p.m., my phone wouldn't stop ringing. "Mom, they blocked the card. The waiter is threatening to call the cops. I need cash urgently." He was in a complete panic. But let me tell you from the beginning how we got to this moment. Let me show you how Mother's Day became the day I finally stopped being a doormat and started fighting back. The morning sun here in Naples, Florida, has a way of finding every speck of dust on the glass sliding doors. But today, I didn't mind. It was Mother's Day. The light pouring into my living room felt different today. Brighter, maybe a little more hopeful. I'm Suzanne. I turned 67 last month. And for the first time in years, I wasn't dreading this Sunday. Usually, Mother's Day is a quiet affair in this house. My husband passed away 5 years ago, and since then, the silence has grown heavy. You get used to the quiet, You learn to live with the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock. But today, the silence felt temporary. It felt like the pause before a celebration. I sat with my coffee, watching the neighbors across the street. A minivan had pulled up there an hour ago, and I watched a young man unload a massive bouquet of pink lilies for his mother. I smiled, sipping my coffee. For once, I didn't feel that sharp pang of jealousy. I didn't have to pretend I wasn't looking. Because today I had plans. My son, Louis, was coming for me. I looked at the clock on the microwave. It was only 9 a.m. I had hours to go, but my mind was already replaying the phone call from Tuesday. That call was my lifeline this week. I must have replayed it in my head 100 times. Louis isn't bad, really. He's just busy. Life gets in the way. He has his wife, Valerie, and his job, and I understand that I'm not the center of his universe anymore. That's the natural order of things, isn't it? We raise them to leave us. But lately, busy had started to feel a lot like indifferent. He would forget birthdays or send a text 2 days late. Last Christmas was just a 20-minute visit because they had to get to Valerie's parents' house. But this Tuesday was different. When I saw his name on the caller ID, I expected the usual rushed tone. I expected him to ask for a favor or tell me he couldn't make it this weekend. Instead, his voice was booming, full of an energy I hadn't heard since he was a boy. "Mom," he had said, "don't make any plans for Sunday. I'm taking care of everything." I remember gripping the phone a little tighter. "Everything?" I asked. "You mean dinner?" "I mean a real outing, Mom," he said. "I made a reservation at that new place downtown, the one with the white tablecloths and the ocean view. Be ready at 4 p.m. sharp. I'm taking you somewhere distinct. You deserve to be spoiled. You deserve to be spoiled." Those words stuck to my ribs like a hot meal. When you get to my age and you're living alone, nobody talks about spoiling you anymore. They talk about managing you. They talk about your health or your safety or your finances. But to be spoiled, to be treated like the prize, not the burden, that brought tears to my eyes right there in the kitchen. I finished my coffee and walked to the hallway mirror. I ran a hand over my hair. I needed to make sure it was perfect. I wanted to look the part. If my son was going to show me off at a fancy restaurant, I wasn't going to embarrass him. But if I'm being honest with you, and I feel like I can be, there was a tiny knot of worry in my stomach. It was about the money. It's always about the money, isn't it? Louis has a good job, but he and Valerie live loud. They like new cars. They like brand name clothes. And I know how expensive that restaurant he mentioned is. A dinner there for 3 people could easily run over $600 or $700. My mind drifted to the emergency joint account. A few years ago, after I had a scare with my blood pressure, I put Louis on my main savings account. It was supposed to be for emergencies. If I ended up in the hospital and couldn't pay a bill, I wanted him to be able to handle it without red tape. It was about trust. It was my safety net, my nest egg that my husband and I had built over 40 years of hard work. I trust Louis. I do. He's my son. But sometimes the lines get blurry for him. I had to remind myself that he wouldn't be reckless. Not today. Not on Mother's Day. He promised he was treating me. Surely, that meant he had saved up for it. He wouldn't use my own money to take me out, right? That would be tacky. I pushed the thought away. Stop it, Suzanne. I scolded myself. Don't ruin this. I looked out the window again. The sun was climbing higher. The neighbor was now hugging her son on the front lawn. I took a deep breath. Today wasn't about bank accounts or past disappointments. It was about a promise. Louis had promised to be here at 4 p.m. He promised it would be special. For the first time in a long time, I let myself believe that things were turning a corner. I let myself believe that he finally understood how much I needed this. I wasn't asking for the world. I just wanted a few hours where I wasn't invisible. I walked to my bedroom to lay out my dress. It was a soft blue silk, the color of the Gulf water in the morning. I smoothed the fabric on the bedspread. I was going to look beautiful. I was going to be ready. I just hoped he would be on time. By 2:30 in the afternoon, the house was quiet, but my bathroom was a flurry of activity. I had laid out everything on the bedspread like I was preparing for a royal inspection. The blue silk dress, my nude pumps, the pearl earrings my husband, Frank, had given me for our 30th anniversary, and the small clutch purse that only held a lipstick and a tissue. I took my time in the shower. I didn't want to rush. Today wasn't just about going to dinner. It was about the ritual of being a woman again. So often, when you live alone, the days bleed into one another. You stop wearing the nice perfume because, well, who is going to smell it? You stop wearing the good jewelry because you're just going to the grocery store or the pharmacy. But today, I reached for the expensive bottle of perfume on the back of the vanity. I dabbed it on my wrists, and behind my ears, the scent of jasmine filling the small room. It smelled like memories. It smelled like the days when my calendar was full and my house was loud. Getting into the dress was a bit of a battle. That's the thing nobody tells you about aging alone. The zippers. I had to do that little dance, twisting my arm behind my back, holding my breath, trying to catch the tab. When I finally got it zipped up, I let out a long breath and turned to the full-length mirror on the back of the bedroom door. I stood there for a long time. The woman staring back at me wasn't the same woman from 10 years ago. The blue silk still fit, but it hugged curves that were softer now. My arms weren't as firm as they used to be. I leaned in closer to the glass, inspecting my face. The lines around my eyes had deepened into permanent grooves. My neck wasn't as smooth as I remembered. For a split second, that familiar wave of insecurity tried to wash over me. The voice that says, "Who are you trying to fool, Suzanne? You're an old woman." But I stopped that thought in its tracks. I straightened my spine. I lifted my chin. "No," I whispered to the empty room. "Not today." I looked at those wrinkles, and I decided to see them differently. They weren't flaws. They were a map. They were the roadmap of a life that had survived raising a son, burying a husband, and managing a household alone for 5 years. I looked dignified. I looked like someone who had stories to tell. I smoothed the fabric over my hips. Today, I thought, I am not just a widow. I am not just a grandmother in waiting. And I am certainly not just a bank account for emergencies. Today, I am a mother. And my son is coming to claim me. I felt good. I felt visible. I moved to the living room at 3:45 p.m. I didn't want to sit on the couch and risk wrinkling the back of my dress. So I stood by the front window. I felt ridiculous, like a teenager waiting for a prom date, peeling back the curtain every time a car drove past. My heart was actually fluttering in my chest. It was a nervous, giddy energy I hadn't felt in years. I checked my phone. 3:55 p.m. He'll be here any minute, I said aloud. The sound of my own voice startled me a little. The house was so quiet that even a whisper seemed loud. I checked my purse again. I had my ID, my lipstick, and my credit card tucked in the back slot, just in case, though I prayed I wouldn't need it. I wanted to be prepared. For PM arrived. I watched the digital clock on the cable box flip from 3:59 to 4 o'clock. I stared at the driveway, expecting to see Louis's silver sedan turn the corner. Nothing, just the empty street and the neighbor's sprinkler hitting the pavement. That's fine, I told myself. It's exactly 4 o'clock. He's probably just parking the car or turning onto the street. He's not late yet. I paced the length of the living room. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. 4:10 p.m. My palms started to sweat. I wiped them carefully on a tissue so I wouldn't stain the silk. The giddy excitement began to curdle into something heavier. Anxiety. My mind started doing that terrible thing it does when you're waiting. It started inventing scenarios. Did I get the time wrong? I unlocked my phone and scrolled back to our text messages, even though I had memorized them. There it was in blue and white. Pick you up at 4, Mom. Be ready. I wasn't wrong. 4:15 p.m. I went back to the window. The sun was starting to dip just a little lower, casting longer shadows across the lawn. The silence in the house began to change. It wasn't a peaceful silence anymore. It felt suffocating. It felt like the house was watching me, waiting for me to realize something I didn't want to admit. The fear of being forgotten is a cold thing. It starts in your stomach and spreads out to your fingertips. It's the fear that you are sitting here dressed in your best clothes, wearing perfume, and the person you are waiting for hasn't thought about you once all day. I checked my phone volume. Maybe I missed a call? No, the ringer was all the way up. Traffic, I said, forcing a smile onto my face, catching my reflection in the dark TV screen. It has to be the traffic. Naples traffic during the season can be a nightmare. Louis lives on the other side of town, near the new developments. If there was an accident on 41, he could be sitting in bumper-to-bumper gridlock right now. He's probably stressed, trying to find his phone to call me, but he can't because he's driving. That's it. He's a good driver. He wouldn't text and drive. I refused to sit down. If I sat down, it would be admitting that he was late. If I stayed standing by the window, I was just ready. I watched a black car slow down in front of the house, and my heart leaped into my throat. I grabbed my purse, ready to walk out the door. But the car sped up and kept going. My hand dropped to my side. 4:20 p.m. He's coming. I insisted, though my voice sounded smaller this time. He promised he wouldn't do this. Not today. I turned my back on the window and walked to the kitchen to get a glass of water. My throat was dry. I needed to wash down the lump that was forming there. I wouldn't let doubt ruin the day. He was just running late. That's all it was. Just traffic. Just normal, heavy holiday traffic. He was coming. He had to be. At 4:35 p.m., the sound of a car engine finally broke the silence of my street. I didn't just hear it. I felt the relief wash over me like cool water. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 40 minutes. See? I told myself, he made it. The traffic must have been terrible, just like I thought. I grabbed my purse from the entryway table, took one last look in the mirror to check my lipstick, and opened the front door. A sleek, silver Lexus SUV was idling in my driveway. It wasn't Louis's usual car, which confused me for a second, but then I remembered he had mentioned thinking about upgrading. He must have done it. He pulled up right to the walkway, the car gleaming under the Florida sun. I stepped out, locking the house door behind me. I wouldn't be needing my keys for a while. I put a smile on my face, the kind that reaches your eyes, and started walking down the path. I was careful in my heels, but I moved with a little pep in my step. My son was here. The driver's side door opened, and Louis stepped out. He looked handsome. He was wearing that navy blue suit I love, the one that makes his shoulders look broad. He had a fresh haircut, and he was smiling. My heart swelled with pride. That's my boy, I thought. He really did go all out. Hi, honey, I called out, waving my hand a little. But before he could answer, the passenger door opened. Then the back door opened. My smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. Valerie, his wife, stepped out of the front seat. She looked lovely, wearing a fitted cream cocktail dress. But it was who climbed out of the back seat that made my feet stop moving. It was Bessie, Valerie's mother. Now, I have nothing against Bessie in principle. She's a grandmother to my grandchildren, just like I am. But seeing her there, in my driveway on Mother's Day, felt strange. Louis hadn't mentioned a group dinner. I tried to adjust my expectations quickly. Okay, I thought, we're doing a joint celebration. That's fine. The more the merrier. I can share the day. But then I really looked at her. Bessie wasn't just dressed for dinner. She was dressed for a gala. She was wearing a shimmering gold gown that looked tight enough to cut off circulation. And the jewelry, my goodness, she was dripping in it. Heavy gold earrings, a thick necklace, and on her right wrist, flashing in the sunlight, was a massive diamond tennis bracelet. It was blinding. I stared at it. It looked brand new. The diamonds went all the way around, thick and heavy. I know jewelry. My husband, Frank, was a jeweler for 30 years. I know what things cost. That bracelet wasn't costume jewelry. It was real, and it was worth a small fortune. Bessie saw me looking. She didn't smile. She didn't say, "Happy Mother's Day, Suzanne." She just lifted her wrist, shook it slightly so the diamond sparkled, and gave me a little wave. It felt less like a greeting and more like a queen dismissing a servant. I swallowed the lump in my throat and kept walking toward the car. I reached for the handle of the back door, figuring I would squeeze in next to Bessie. "You look beautiful, Mom," Louis said, walking around the front of the car. "Thank you, Louis," I said, reaching for the handle again. "I'm ready." I was getting a little worried about the time, but... "Wait, Mom," Louis said. His voice was sharp. I froze. My hand was inches from the car door. "What?" Louis stepped between me and the car. He wasn't opening the door for me. He was blocking it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his iPhone. He held it out toward me, unlocking the screen. "The lighting is incredible right now," he said, sounding rushed. "The sun is hitting the driveway perfectly. Can you snap a quick picture of us by the car? We want to post it before we leave." I stared at the phone in his hand. My brain couldn't process the words. "A picture?" "Yeah, just a quick one," Valerie chimed in, smoothing her dress. She walked over and linked arms with Louis. Bessie waddled over, positioning herself right in the center, making sure that diamond bracelet was front and center on Louis's shoulder. "Come on, Suzanne," Bessie said, her voice grating. "We're losing the light." I took the phone. My hands were shaking. I felt cold, despite the 80-degree heat. "Just press the big round button," Louis instructed, as if I didn't know how to use a phone. Make sure you get the car in the shot. It's a rental, we want to show it off. I stepped back. I lifted the phone. On the screen, I saw the three of them. My son, his wife, and her mother. They were beaming. They looked like a perfect, happy family. And I was on the other side of the glass. I tapped the button. Click. One more, Louis said, grinning. Horizontal this time. I turned the phone. Click. I lowered the phone and handed it back to Louis. He took it, quickly checking the photos. Awesome. Thanks, Mom. These came out great. He turned and started walking back to the driver's side. Valerie got back in the front. Bessie began to hoist herself into the back seat. I stood there on the pavement, my clutch purse gripped tight in my hand. They were getting back in the car. Without me. Louis, I said. My voice came out as a whisper. I cleared my throat and tried again, louder. Louis. He paused with his hand on the door, looking back at me with a confused expression. Yeah. Aren't. I gestured to the empty seat in the back. Aren't I coming? Louis laughed. It was a short, dry sound. He looked at Valerie, then back at me. He had a look on his face like I had just asked if I could fly the space shuttle. Mom, did you really think this was for you? He asked. He didn't sound angry. He sounded amused. This is a high-end place. It's not really your scene. Plus, the reservation is only for 3. It's a special treat for Valerie and Bessie. But I stammered. You said you were taking me somewhere distinct. You said I deserved to be spoiled. I said I was handling everything. He said, checking his watch. And I did. I stopped by to say hi, didn't I? Look, we really have to go. They'll give our table away if we're more than 15 minutes late. He got in the car and slammed the door. I stood frozen. I watched through the tinted glass as Bessie leaned forward and said something to Louis. They all laughed. The engine revved. Louis didn't wave goodbye. He just put the car in reverse, backed out of the driveway, and sped off down the street. I was left standing in the exhaust fumes, wearing my blue silk dress and my pearls, holding a purse that had no reason to be held. The silence rushed back into the neighborhood, louder than before. They hadn't forgotten me. That would have been cruel, but accidental. This was deliberate. He had come to my house, used me as a prop for his social media photo, and left me on the curb. The dinner wasn't for me. It never was. I looked down at the tire marks on the driveway. Then I remembered the flash of light from Bessie's wrist. That bracelet. Something cold settled in my stomach. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was suspicion. I turned around and walked back to the front door. I didn't rush. I didn't cry. I walked with a purpose. I needed to see something. I needed to check my iPad. I stood there for a moment longer than I should have. The Florida heat was already starting to prickle against my neck, but I felt frozen cold. Just before Louis had hit the gas, the back window had rolled down. I remember hoping for one foolish second that he had changed his mind, that he was going to say, "Hop in, Mom, we'll make room." But it wasn't Louis. It was Bessie. She leaned her head out, the sunlight catching those heavy gold earrings. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my blue silk dress, the one I had felt so dignified in just an hour ago. "Oh, Suzanne," she purred, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You look comfortable. Enjoy your evening in." Then the window rolled up, severing the connection. The car pulled away, turning the corner and disappearing from view. Comfortable. That word hung in the humid air like a slap in the face. In her world, comfortable was code. It meant old. It meant frumpy. It meant I was someone who stayed home and watched television while the important people went out to live their lives. I looked around the neighborhood. Mrs. Higgins across the street was watering her hydrangeas. She had stopped, the hose drooping in her hand, staring right at me. She had seen the whole thing. She had seen me rush out, beaming like a child on Christmas, and she had seen me left behind in a cloud of exhaust fumes. I didn't wave to her. I couldn't bear the pity in her eyes. I turned around and walked back up the driveway. My heels clicked loudly on the pavers. Click, 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 a rhythm of humiliation. I reached the front door and fumbled with the lock. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped the keys. I had to crouch down in my nice dress to pick them up, and I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Get it together, Suzanne, I whispered. I got the door open and stepped inside. The house was cool and dark. The contrast was blinding after the bright afternoon sun. I closed the door behind me and leaned my back against it, shutting out the world. The silence of the house hit me differently this time. Before, it was a waiting silence. Now it was a tomb. The smell of my jasmine perfume still lingered in the hallway, but now it just smelled sad. It smelled like effort wasted. I kicked off my nude pumps right there in the entryway. I didn't care where they landed. I walked barefoot across the tile floor to the living room. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror again. The woman looking back at me didn't look dignified anymore. She looked foolish. The blue dress seemed too bright, too hopeful. I looked like a woman who had been tricked. But as I stood there, staring at my own red-rimmed eyes, something shifted inside me. I didn't cry. I waited for the tears. I expected to collapse onto the sofa and weep into a throw pillow, mourning the relationship I thought I had with my son. But the tears didn't come. Instead, a slow, burning heat started to rise in my chest. It wasn't heartbreak. It was anger. Comfortable, I said aloud to the empty room. My voice was steady. My mind kept flashing back to that driveway. Not to Louis's face, but to Bessie's wrist. That bracelet. I know diamonds. I lived with a jeweler for 40 years. I know the way light hits a real stone versus a cubic zirconia. The way that bracelet flashed in the sun, it was high quality. It was heavy. It was expensive. And Louis has been complaining about money for 6 months. Every time we talk, it's the same story. Inflation, Mom. The mortgage rates. The cost of gas. He told me he couldn't afford to fix his own air conditioner last month. He borrowed $200 from me just to cover a vet bill for their dog. So how, in God's name, was he driving a luxury rental car and taking 2 women to a 5-star restaurant? And where did a $10,000 bracelet come from? A sick feeling twisted in my gut. It wasn't the anxiety of waiting anymore. It was the intuition of a mother who knows something is wrong. I walked past the kitchen. I didn't want water. I didn't want food. I went straight to the small desk in the corner of the Florida room where I keep my iPad. I sat down, my silk dress rustling around me. I opened the cover and the screen lit up. My fingers hovered over the banking app icon. That emergency joint account. Frank and I had set that up 20 years ago. We put away $50 here, $100 there. It was supposed to be for a rainy day. It was supposed to be for assisted living or a surgery or to leave something behind for the grandchildren. I had added Louis to it 3 years ago, right after my hip surgery. Just in case, Mom, he had said, if you're under anesthesia, someone needs to be able to pay the hospital. I trusted him. He's my son. He's never stolen from me. He's borrowed, sure, but he always had an excuse for why he couldn't pay it back right away. But stealing? That was a word I wasn't ready to use. I tapped the icon. The little wheel spun on the screen. Please, I prayed silently. Please let me be wrong. Please let him have won the lottery. Please let it be a credit card debt he's racking up. Not this. The app opened. Face ID recognized me. The dashboard loaded. I took a deep breath, adjusted my glasses, and looked at the balance. My breath hitched in my throat. The number was wrong. It had to be wrong. I tapped on recent transactions. The list populated, and as I read the first line, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The silence in the house was no longer empty. It was screaming at me. I didn't need to guess anymore. I didn't need to wonder why I wasn't invited to dinner. The answer was staring me right in the face in black and red numbers. I sat back in my chair, the iPad heavy in my hands. The anger that had been simmering boiled over into a cold, hard resolve. They thought I was just an old woman sitting at home, being comfortable. They thought I was invisible. Well, they were about to find out that invisible women see everything. I stared at the screen until the numbers started to blur. There it was, right at the top of the pending transactions list. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't a mistake. It was a line item that punched me right in the gut. Pending, $14,525, Diamond Vault, Naples, 3:15 p.m. I took off my glasses and wiped them on my dress, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. I put them back on. The numbers were still there. $14,525. I looked at the balance below it. The account, which had held nearly $20,000 this morning, money frank, and I had scraped together over decades, was now decimated. There was barely enough left to cover a month of groceries. I looked at the timestamp, 3:15 p.m. The math was simple, and it was brutal. Lewis had told me he was running late to pick me up at 4 p.m. He wasn't stuck in traffic. He was at the jewelry store. He was standing at a counter, using a debit card with my name on it to buy a diamond tennis bracelet for his mother-in-law. He had drained my life savings to impress Bessie, and then he had driven to my house, taken a photo of her wearing it, and left me on the curb. I felt a wave of nausea, but it passed quickly, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. This wasn't just bad behavior. This was theft. He didn't ask me. He didn't even warn me. He just took it, assuming I was too old or too comfortable to notice until the statement came in the mail next month. By then, he probably figured he'd have some excuse ready. My hand reached for the phone. My first instinct was to call him. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him how he could do this to his own mother. I wanted to hear him stutter and lie. But then I stopped. If I called him now, he would talk his way out of it. He would say it was an investment, or that he'd pay me back next week, or he would gaslight me and tell me I was overreacting. He would ruin the satisfaction of what I needed to do. I put the cell phone down. Instead, I picked up the landline and turned my debit card over to read the small 1-800 number on the back. I dialed the bank. The automated voice asked for my account number. I punched it in. I waded through the menus. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my voice, when the agent finally picked up, was steady. It sounded like someone else's voice. Frauds department. Please, I said. A nice young woman came on the line. Miss Hubbard, how can I help you today? I'm looking at my online statement, I said, staring at the iPad. I see a pending charge for $14,500 at a jewelry store. Yes, ma'am, I see that here. The Diamond Vault. Was there an issue with the merchant? I did not make that purchase. I said, clearly, I am in possession of my card. I am at home. I did not authorize a purchase of that size. I see, the agent said, her tone shifting to professional concern. There is a secondary cardholder on this account, a Lewis Hubbard. Could he have made the purchase? I paused. This was the moment. If I said yes, the money was gone. If I said yes, I was accepting my role as the doormat. I did not authorize this transaction. I repeated, The money in this account is for medical emergencies. It is not for jewelry. If that charge goes through, it is theft. I want the account frozen. Immediately. Understood, Ms. Hubbard. I'm marking the transaction as unauthorized and freezing the account for security. No further charges will be approved starting now. We will launch an investigation. Thank you, I said, and cancel the secondary card. Please. Done. Is there anything else? No, that will be all. I hung up the phone. The house was silent again. I sat there for a long time. 5:30 p.m. 6 p.m. I knew what was happening. They were at the restaurant now. They were probably ordering the expensive wine. Bessie was probably waving that wrist around, catching the candlelight, telling everyone what a wonderful son-in-law Louis was. They were eating steak and lobster, laughing, toasting to their good fortune. I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea. I ate a piece of toast. I watched the evening news. I waited. At 7:45 p.m., my cell phone rang. It was Louis. I let it go to voicemail. At 8 p.m., it rang again. And again. Then Valerie called. Then Louis again. I sat in my armchair, watching the phone light up on the coffee table. It buzzed angrily, vibrating against the wood. I just watched it, sipping my tea. Finally, at 8:15 p.m., I picked it up. Hello, I said, keeping my voice light. Mom, pick up. Jesus. Louis was screaming. I could hear the noise in the background, clattering dishes, voices. He sounded breathless, like he had run outside. Louis, I asked, what's wrong? You sound upset. The card declined, he shouted. He was panicking. I tried to pay the bill, and the machine rejected it. I tried it 3 times. The waiter is looking at me like I'm a criminal. The manager just came over. Oh dear, I said, that is embarrassing. Mom, listen to me. I need you to transfer money. Now, the bill is huge. We ordered the champagne, the seafood tower. It's over $800, plus the tip. I don't have that on my personal card. I need you to unblock the joint account or transfer $1,000 to my Venmo right now. They're threatening to call the cops, Mom. He was desperate. I could hear the fear in his voice. This was a man who cared deeply about how he looked to the world, and he was currently looking like a fraud in front of his wife and her mother. Please, Mom, he begged. Just do it. We can talk about it later. Just save me here. I took a deep breath. I thought about the comfortable comment. I thought about the photo in the driveway. I thought about the $14,500 pending charge that he hadn't even mentioned yet. Louis, I said softly, what? Are you sending it? You spent $14,000 on a mother today, I said. The line went dead silent. The background noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away. He knew. He knew that I knew. Mom, he started, his voice dropping to a whisper. You already spent my money, I said, my voice hard as stone. You bought a diamond bracelet for the mother you wanted to celebrate. Mom, it's not. So, I interrupted him. Let the woman wearing my retirement fund pay for your dinner. I didn't wait for his answer. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button. Click. I set the phone back down on the table. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I felt lighter. I felt powerful. I took another sip of tea. It was still warm. The evening was turning out to be quite comfortable, after all. After I hung up the phone, the silence that filled my kitchen was different than the silence I had felt earlier that day. Before, it was a lonely silence. Now, it was heavy, vibrating with the energy of what I had just done. I had cut him off. I had finally said the words that had been sitting in my throat for years. I looked at the phone on the coffee table. It lit up almost immediately. Louis calling. I didn't reach for it. I didn't feel that tug in my chest that usually pulls me to answer, that motherly instinct that says, he needs me. Instead, I stood up and walked into the kitchen. I realized I hadn't eaten since breakfast. My stomach was growling, a mundane reminder that life goes on even when your heart is breaking. I made a turkey sandwich. I moved slowly, deliberately. I spread the mustard on the bread, listening to the phone buzz in the other room. BZZZT, BZZZT, BZZZT. It stopped, and then started again 5 seconds later. Then it was Valerie, then Louis again. I took a bite of my sandwich. It tasted dry, but I forced myself to swallow. I counted the calls in my head as I ate. 10, 20, 30. By the time I finished my tea, there were 45 missed calls and a dozen text messages. I didn't read a single one. I turned the phone off, completely powered it down, and left it on the counter. Then I went to my bedroom, washed the makeup off my face, hung up my blue silk dress, and went to sleep. I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, Monday, I was in the kitchen pouring my second cup of coffee when the pounding started. It wasn't a knock. It was a fist hammering against the wood of my front door. It shook the frame. Mom, open up. I know you're in there. It was Louis. I didn't rush. I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the warmth, and tightened the belt of my robe. I walked to the door and unlocked it. Louis almost fell into the hallway. He looked terrible. His navy blue suit, the one that had looked so sharp yesterday, was wrinkled and stained. His tie was undone, hanging loose around his neck. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles, and he smelled like stale alcohol and sweat. He looked at me, wild-eyed. Why is your phone off? Do you have any idea what you did to me last night? He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't apologize for leaving me on the curb. He just marched into my living room and started pacing, running his hands through his messy hair. Good morning, Louis, I said calmly, leaning against the doorframe. I didn't offer him a seat. I didn't ask if he wanted coffee. There is nothing good about it, he shouted. He spun around to face me. You humiliated me, Mom. You completely destroyed me. I think you did that to yourself. I said, do you know what happened after you hung up? He gestured wildly. The manager came back. He said the card was reported stolen. Stolen, Mom. He threatened to call the police right there in the middle of the dining room. People were staring. Bessie was staring. I took another sip of coffee. And I had to admit I couldn't pay, he said, his voice cracking. I had to sit there and tell my mother-in-law that I didn't have the money. Bessie had to pay. She had to dig into her purse and pull out her credit card to cover a $900 bill for a dinner I invited her to. She was furious. She called me a fraud. He slumped onto the sofa, putting his head in his hands. She made me tell her, he mumbled into his palms. Tell her what? I asked. About the bracelet. He said. He looked up, his face twisted in misery. When she paid the bill, she started asking questions. She asked how I could afford a $14,000 bracelet if I couldn't afford a lobster dinner. She put 2 and 2 together. She realized I used your card. I watched him, waiting. She made me take it back. He whispered. This morning. She wouldn't even wear it home. She threw it at me in the car. She said she didn't want stolen goods. I had to go to the Diamond Vault as soon as they opened at 9 a.m. and return it. The salesman, he looked at me like I was garbage. They refunded the money to your account. It's back. Are you happy now? He looked at me with tears in his eyes, waiting for me to comfort him. He was waiting for me to say, oh, honey, I'm so sorry you went through that. It's okay. We'll fix it. That's what I had done his whole life. When he failed a test, when he wrecked his first car, when he got into debt, I was always the soft place for him to land. But as I looked at him, a 40-year-old man crying because his mother-in-law found out he wasn't rich, I didn't feel soft. I felt like concrete. I'm not happy, Louis, I said, but I am relieved. Relieved? He looked confused. I almost got arrested. I'm relieved because I have my money back, I said, and I'm relieved because I finally see you. What are you talking about? I'm your son. No, I said, setting my coffee cup down on the coaster. To you, I'm not a mother. I'm a resource. You didn't come here this morning to apologize for hurting me. You didn't come here because you felt bad about leaving me on the driveway like an old piece of furniture. You came here because you're embarrassed. You're only sorry that you got caught. He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. You love the lifestyle I can help you fake, Louis. You don't love me. If you loved me, you wouldn't have looked me in the eye and lied to me yesterday. You wouldn't have bought diamonds for another woman with the money your father left to keep me safe. The room went quiet. He stared at me, stunningly silent. It was the first time in his life that his charm hadn't worked, that his tears hadn't worked. He looked at the kitchen, maybe hoping I'd offer him breakfast, hoping things would go back to normal. But I just stood there, tightening my robe, waiting for him to leave. The hospitality was closed. The bank was closed. And for the first time, he looked scared. Not of the police, but of me. Louis left my house 10 minutes later. He didn't slam the door this time. He just walked out, shoulders slumped, looking like a man who had lost his wallet and his pride in the same morning. I watched his car disappear down the street, and I waited for the guilt to set in. You know, that guilt I'm talking about. It's that little voice that has been whispering to me for 40 years. He's your baby. Be patient. He's trying. Don't be too hard on him. But as I locked the deadbolt, the voice was silent. I didn't feel guilty. I felt mobilized. I went straight to the bedroom and got dressed. Not in a silk dress this time, but in my good slacks and a sensible blouse. I grabbed my purse, my ID, and the folder where I keep my important documents. I drove straight to the bank. I've been banking at the same branch for 20 years. I know the manager, and I know most of the tellers. When I walked in, the air conditioning hit me, cool and crisp. It felt like a place of business. And I meant business. I sat down at the desk of a senior banker named Nancy. She's a lovely woman about my age, who always asks about my garden. Today, I didn't have time for small talk. I need to make some changes to my accounts, Nancy, I said, placing my ID on the desk. I need to remove Louis as a signer. Completely. I want his card canceled, his access revoked, and his name taken off the paperwork. Today, Nancy looked at me over her reading glasses. She didn't ask why. She's been in banking long enough to know what that look on a woman's face means. She just started typing. We can certainly do that, Suzanne, she said. I see the fraud alert from yesterday. The $14,000 was refunded this morning by the merchant. The balance is restored. Good, I said, but I don't want him to have the chance to try again. Nancy clicked away on her keyboard, printing out forms for me to sign. But then she paused. She squinted at the screen, scrolling down. Suzanne, she said quietly, since we are removing him, I should probably bring something else to your attention. I know you don't check the online banking often. I checked it yesterday, I said. I saw the jewelry charge. No, this is further back, she said. She turned the monitor so I could see it. The fraud alert flagged the big purchase, but looking at the history, there have been a lot of smaller withdrawals over the last 8 months. Did you authorize these? I leaned in. My heart started to thump a slow, heavy rhythm. I saw a list of transactions I had never seen before because I only waited for the paper statement, and I usually just looked at the bottom line. $60, GameStop. $45, Shell gas station. $25, Starbucks. $120, Ticketmaster. $200, cash withdrawal ATM. The list went on and on, page after page. They were small enough that they didn't trigger a fraud alert, Nancy explained gently. We call these test transactions in the industry. Sometimes people do it to see if anyone is watching. When nobody complains, they get bolder. I stared at the screen. Video games, coffee, concert tickets. The diamond bracelet was a shock, but this was worse. The bracelet was a one-time act of madness. But these charges, these were daily betrayals. For 8 months, Louis had been using my life savings as his personal slush fund. Every time he bought a latte, he was stealing from me. Every time he filled up his gas tank to drive to work, he was doing it on my dime. He wasn't struggling. He was just entitled. He was siphoning off my security, $5 at a time, while I sat at home eating leftovers to save money. He was testing me. I whispered. He wanted to see how much he could get away with before he went for the big one. It looks that way, Nancy said. Do you want to dispute these as well? I looked at the total. It was probably $2,000 or $3,000 over the course of the year. No, I said, sitting back. Let him keep the video games. It's the price of my education. I know exactly who he is now. I signed the papers to remove him. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. He's gone, Nancy said, stamping the form. He has no access. If he tries to use the card number, it will decline. Thank you, I said. I stood up to leave, but then I stopped. I looked at the glass office in the corner where the trust officer sat. I had a will. I had written it 10 years ago. It was simple. Everything was to be divided equally between my husband and my son. Since Frank passed, everything was set to go to Louis. The house, the savings, the insurance. Everything. I thought about Bessie. I thought about her wearing that bracelet. I thought about Valerie, who had watched me stand on the curb and said nothing. If something happened to me tomorrow, Louis would get it all. And within a year, he would spend it all on them. They would be living in my house, driving cars bought with my money, laughing about poor old Suzanne. Nancy, I said, putting my hand back on the desk. Is the trust officer available? I need to make an update to my will. Nancy's eyebrows went up, but she nodded. I think he has an opening. Are you sure? You seem emotional today. I have never been more rational in my life, I said. I walked into that office, and I did something that might shock some of you. I sat down, and I wrote my son out of my will. I didn't leave him empty-handed. I'm not vindictive. I set up a small trust that would pay out a modest monthly amount, enough for groceries, maybe, but only starting when he turned 55. But the lump sum? The house? The nest egg? No. I decided to leave the bulk of it to a local charity that helps elderly women who have no family, women who actually need it. I sat there looking at the draft. A part of me wondered, is this too harsh? He's my only child. Am I being cruel? But then I remembered the test withdrawals. I remembered the Starbucks and the gas. He didn't respect me. He saw me as a bank machine. And you don't leave an inheritance to a bank machine. You leave it to a person you cherish. Respect must be earned. And Louis was currently in the negative. I signed the document. Walking out of the bank into the bright Florida sunshine, I expected to feel heavy. I expected to feel like a grieving mother. But I didn't. I felt light. I felt like I was floating. For the first time in years, I wasn't worrying about Louis. I wasn't worrying if he had enough money or if he was happy or if he liked me. I had cut the cord. I wasn't losing a son. I realized as I got into my car. I was losing a leech. And the difference was a sun adds to your life. A leech just drains you until you're dry. I started the engine. I had my money. I had my dignity. And for the first time in a long time, the future looked like it belonged to me. It has been 3 weeks since I walked out of that bank. 3 weeks since I rewrote my will and finally drew a line in the sand. You might think that after cutting off my only son, my life would become smaller. You might think I would be sitting in my dark living room, staring at old photo albums, regretting my decision. But the funny thing is, my world hasn't gotten smaller. It has exploded with color. I used to spend my Tuesday mornings dusting the guest room for visitors who never came. I used to spend my afternoons waiting by the phone, terrified I might miss a call from Lewis. But today, I wasn't home to dust, and I wasn't near my phone. I was at the Naples Botanical Garden, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and gardening gloves, laughing so hard my sides hurt. I joined the local gardening club a few days after the incident. I was nervous at first. I thought everyone would already have their cliques, that I would be the new girl at 67. But when I walked in, I didn't see strangers. I saw women just like me. I met a woman named Patricia. She's a widow, too. We were potting orchids, getting our hands covered in soil, and she started talking about her daughter in Chicago, who calls her every Sunday like clockwork. She didn't brag about it. She just shared it. And for the first time, I didn't feel jealous. I felt happy for her. After the meeting, Patricia turned to me and asked, "Suzanne, a few of us are going to get iced coffee down the street. Would you like to come?" I froze for a second. I waited for the catch. I waited for her to ask if I could drive or if I could pick up the tab. But she was just looking at me, smiling. She wanted my company. She liked me for me, not for what I could provide. "I would love to," I said. And I did. We sat at a cafe for 2 hours, talking about everything from rose bushes to retirement plans. I realized that I had been starving for conversation, real conversation where the other person actually listens instead of just waiting for their turn to ask for something. When I got home this evening, the sun was just starting to dip low, painting the Florida sky in streaks of orange and purple. I made myself a glass of iced tea with fresh mint from my new herb garden and walked out onto the porch. I sat in my favorite rocking chair, listening to the crickets start their evening song. It was peaceful. Then my phone buzzed on the side table. My stomach gave a little lurch. Old habits die hard, but I didn't panic. I picked it up. It was a text from Lewis. "Hey, Mom. Hope you're okay. Look, I know things are weird right now, but I'm literally on fumes here. Can you Venmo me $40 for gas? Just until payday. I swear I'll pay you back." I stared at the screen. The audacity of it almost made me laugh. After the bracelet, after the restaurant, after I told him to his face that I was done, he was still trying. He was testing the waters. He started small again. Gas money, just like those little withdrawals on the bank statement. He wanted to see if the Bank of Mom was open for business again. He wanted to see if my guilt had kicked in yet. I looked at the message, and I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel the urge to lecture him or try to fix him. I just felt done. I didn't type a reply. I didn't ask him why he didn't ask his wife or his mother-in-law or why a grown man didn't have $40 for gas. I simply pressed delete. Then I blocked the number for the evening. I put the phone face down on the table and took a long sip of my iced tea. The condensation was cold against my hand. I looked out at my street. Mrs. Higgins was walking her dog. She waved, and this time I waved back big and broad. I am alone in this house. There are no noisy dinners planned. There are no frantic phone calls. There is just me. But as I sat there watching the sunset, I realized something profound. I am alone, but I am not lonely. For years, I thought loneliness was having an empty house. But I was wrong. Loneliness is sitting in a room with people who don't see you. Loneliness is being used. Loneliness is waiting for love that has a price tag attached to it. I am free of that now. I have my dignity. I have my garden. I have my Tuesday mornings with Patricia. And most importantly, I have myself. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of jasmine and fresh cut grass. I am Suzanne Hubbard. I am 67 years old. And for the first time in a very long time, I am enough. Suzanne cut her son off completely after he chose his mother-in-law over her. Was she right to humiliate him at the restaurant, or should she have paid the bill one last time? Tell us in the comments. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks, so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life.